mic on? There it is. First of all, thank you guys for having us up. Before we get started, I just want to share a story of how this actually happened. I'm going to shout out Kristen, who wasn't able to be here today. About 6 months ago, we met in Toronto, and we had a full discussion, more like a battle, about what sneakers we had on our feet. And Kristen and I had like an hour where we were going back and forth about a company that's called StockX. And I thought StockX was a better company than the company he was supporting, which was Go. And then through some alcoholic beverages, the conversation went to a whole other level. And then we realized that the baseline of what we're speaking about is really like, how do you continue to do things in a space creatively? Because that's what sneakers are. So then he invited me to have a conversation here today, but he wasn't able to come. So then when he told me that he wasn't able to be here, I was thinking to myself, who would be someone that I could speak to or have a discussion about people and change and investing in people? Carren Morris, friend / colleague, who has so much knowledge to share. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and we can get into a conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Carren Morris, I'm founder of LaunchPad Services, and my background is within the sneaker industry. Worked for some major brands and decided to start my consulting firm, taking the knowledge I learned from there, and I work between Europe and the United States with my clients, working on strategic partnerships and business development.
Me knowing, I mean, you've been able to do it internationally, globally. What are some of the things you've seen when it comes to investing in people and people in change?
You know, there's three things when you invited me to speak about human change, and looking at it from the employee standpoint, from the employer standpoint, and then also within partners. I call partners, it could be your vendors or your suppliers, right?
Absolutely.
And especially with my focus being on strategic partnerships. But you look at employees, and as there's been mentioning about you know, millennials and some expectations coming around as an employee, the reason why we have people have expectations of what they want from their employers. So due to social media, they're able to say, look at the Google campus or look at the Nike campus. These are the things that I want, and I expect to be able to have ping pong, you know, to be able to play that.
Everything is so much more accessible. All the information's right in front of them.
Right, exactly. And so as employees, you know, they have a need and a want, and then, you know, that's something that they are going to express, and that's going to determine whether or not they're going to want to work for you. Right? So the needs of people are changing, and employees will also talk about that in the sense of they may see a change that a company needs. I have an example of when I worked for Converse and I was looking at all of our wholesale.com accounts, so all of the accounts that weren't brick and mortar. So it could be from Net-a-Porter to Zappos.com, and as a company, we were not addressing these .com only accounts. We were not addressing them from a marketing standpoint, creating the right assets that were talking about our global campaigns. So I decided to put together a business plan for my senior executives and say, I want to create this job, and this is what I want to do, and I want to handle all of these accounts and make sure that I'm working closely with our marketing and product team so that we can service their needs and still keep, you know, the objective of the brand. And, you know, you look back at that and I was like, wow, that was pretty cool. I did that, right?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
But it was also that, you know, my executive team had to look and say, okay, we do need to change. Let's listen to this employee. And, you know, they were able to create that job for me. You know, nothing changes if nothing changes is a quote that I found that, you know, in preparation for this. And so sometimes we have to listen to those employees. Right? They are seeing things on the outside and they're bringing it inside, and we have to trust them because that's part of our teammate.
I think, you know, one point I like to drive home is like I did a lot of work when I work with brands, I do a lot of work in disrupting the space. So like, how do you disrupt it? Mm-hmm. StockX, which is, you know, it's a platform for sneakers that you can trade online. Mm-hmm. And what they really, really stand on is like making their employees their clients and making their clients their employees. Because in that way, once you kind of have two sides to your brain, where you're driving it as like anyone that works inside this building has a say. And that really helps innovation, but then also on the flip side. So just keeping that as a notion and also thinking about people as humans first.
Right. Exactly.
I know that employee was one thing that you talked about. The second part was being from the employer standpoint.
Right. And to talk about on the employee standpoint side as well, employees are also looking at who their leaders are.
Right.
And that's important. And so, they have access to seeing how, Jeff Bezos is going to talk to a crowd, or how Steve Jobs used to, or Musk. And so they're looking at when they want to get into work for a certain company, they are expecting a level of transparency from their C-suite team, or their executives, at least their managers, right? And so they're expecting that, and that obviously can't come, and they can't know everything that's happening in the future, but they expect this transparency, and they're also expecting a form of EQ, so emotional intelligence. And that is something that we're finding is much more important that managers have to be able to implement. So if you have employees that have these expectations of what they want from a company, if they also have expectations when it comes to working maybe from home remotely, I want to work only 4 days a week long 4 days, and then the 5th day I have off maybe once a month, they're able to implement that for the manager to understand, okay, this is the way the world's changing, because people have other passion projects, they're trying to do other things as well, and we need to support that. In the past, it was very much taboo. You wouldn't talk about anything else you were doing. Now, your whole life is exposed, right? And that should be acceptable. So in terms of, developing EQ for your employees and supporting them in ways that make sense for the organization. And on the flip side, also understanding that there are, some stresses when people do work from home. Right. And so they may not feel as connected, just as we were hearing on the talk earlier. They have to do video conferencing. They're stressed out possibly because, they're not in the office. Am I still being seen? Am I still being heard? So as a manager, I have to also then talk to my employees and offer some solutions for them as well. We do some offsites maybe, twice a year. We're able to have them come into the office quarterly or monthly, depending on, distance, things like that. So we have to be able to implement that as well when we're working with our employees.
Maybe also open up a little bit more about the EI side, the EQ side, because I think that's something we always glaze over.
Right.
Speak about how important it is to actually have EI or EQ, sorry.
Right, and I think that's just because we are all still searching for connections, and so we are so much on our phones so
Absolutely.
much. So we do want to be connected, and so we want to be seen. So it's not just about the processes in place, right? But it's also about, I have something to contribute and to give. And as employees and employers, then we have to also make sure that we have that interaction and at least that listening ear to our employees, so that they can come to us, so that they can feel empowered to say, hey, I have an idea, it's different, you may have to create a new position for me, this isn't how it works, but I want to be able to share this with you. And that could help change the company. But if you haven't allowed that trust that your employees can have, then they're not going to come to you, and you may have missed out on something.
For sure. I feel like, even the talk before, they talked about being fearful of that.
Right.
You make it seem super easy, right? Speak a little bit about how it could be scary to try to bring that new idea. I know if you brought new ideas and been like, oh my God, I can't believe I've done that.
Right.
How does that process actually feel?
Well, there's the beauty of being young. So when I look back at some of the things, doing, you're young. We were talking about this earlier, a bit naive. So, you're able to just forge ahead on some things. But it's, what I do working with clients now is really about strategic partnerships. So, looking at it from, I have to have a relationship with my clients, understand what their needs are, and then make sure that's a huge level of EQ. And even if I'm, I work with tech companies, and so I may be sitting there with a lot of engineers and going over blueprints and things that are not my field of expertise, but I do have to understand where they're coming from and their goals are as I'm relating back to maybe some of our outside vendors in production, and then also taking that back to the CEO who I am, reporting back into, right? So I have to be able to make sure, as any of us, that there is this level of understanding. As we heard earlier, if there's different expertise in the room, but understand where they're coming from, and that is also a level of emotional intelligence. It's not just about you, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing, we're talking about change, and I think the word change itself is always what makes people worry.
Right.
Like when you remove the word change and you start to look at it as how do you evolve, it makes you feel a little bit better. Even last night we were talking about, this equation that I always use, where it's like, if you're fearful of something or you're facing a change, is it a fact? Mm-hmm. Like, is it
Right.
actually true that it's gonna happen if I change this process?
Right.
Or if I put up my hand and ask a question, no one's gonna listen to me. Is it a fact?
Right.
And the more you can actually sit into, is it a fact, and come to an answer in your mind, your next thing is, how do you interpret that, right? Like, if you feel good about it, the outcome of it is gonna be better.
Right.
Right? So it's more of a human behavior that I always try to drive home when I'm working with people. Let's start first as like humans. Cool, like as a human, you're bound to be scared to do something new.
Right.
Because you're thinking of the end game before you even get started, right? So that's something I really want to drive home in anything that we're doing in People and Change is it a fact? And if it isn't a fact, let's go to a positive outcome before we're starting to think negative, which will then lead you to be more open-minded.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly.
There's a quote that I like by Warren Jennings, and he said, as we know, that change is inevitable, but for business it's vital.
Absolutely.
And we know from the Latin word vital, that's life, right?
Right,
You're
right.
gonna live or die by this if you don't change. And so, I have an example of when I worked for Nike, and we had brand guidelines, as any company's going to say, this is where our logo can be placed. It cannot be placed. These are the colors. We were the Nike swoosh is an example here. So the name of the logo, the swoosh, it can never be upside down. It can never be cut off. It can only be in these colors. And so, these were the guidelines. Period. And now, today, what has happened, when you are engaging more with creatives in the space or just partners, they want to do things differently. Now the swoosh is upside down, it's cut off, it's halfway, because they decided, okay, we're going to collaborate with other artists, with other companies, and this is their interpretation of our product. And so something you had that was, these are our brand guidelines, we will never divert from this, has had to change now. And so that's been a demand from the outside. And the brand, this huge global brand, #1 in the world, could say, no, absolutely not. But in terms of talking of disruption, then why wouldn't that creator go somewhere else for another company, right?
Exactly.
And then do it there. And now you've lost that opportunity, and it's going to happen anyway.
And I think that's something to really highlight, because a lot of times, like, you have people in your company who are super creative that are bringing it up the channel, and no one wants to respect that because they've done it this way for a long period of time.
Right.
Nike being an example. The downfall of that is now people will leave your company and become your competitor very quickly. They'll take everything they've learned internally and be like, you guys didn't want to listen to me? I'll either go to your competitor or start my own company and disrupt it.
Yes, exactly.
Right. We spoke about vendors and partners. Maybe let's go down that road too.
Right.
Yeah.
One of my clients is Pencil Footwear Design Academy,
Dwayne.
and Dwayne Edwards is the founder of that, and he was the design director for Jordan Footwear. He decided that he wanted to create a space, an academy. He wanted to be the first footwear academy in the United States, because most of the art schools, they're teaching industrial design, product design. But the whole point for him was education to be free, which he's been able to institute. All the brands pay for the designers to come in.
He's pretty much turned the industry upside down.
Completely.
Right.
So the ways of education is done differently.
Right.
And then also created a teaching model that is, you are working exactly as you would in a corporate environment. So it's not just about going to classes and your studies, but you're coming in, if you're a footwear designer, a color and materials designer, the brand marketing person, and the footwear and the accessories apparel person, all sitting together as they do in corporate, and you are going to take a brief, you're going to figure out your concept all the way to production. So what has happened now is the brands are looking and saying, oh, this is a breeding ground for us to be able to hire and to get our interns, because now we don't have to teach them the corporate way.
Absolutely.
They already know, and we can place them in that. But that was a big deal for these brands to kind of, first of all, turn around and have to pay, to teach the students, but then also that this is a new model, and realize this isn't a competitor either. This is...
It's brand new. It's a brand new space that Dwayne has built.
Right.
We have a partnership with Yellow Brick with Dwayne, in that we're basically, Yellow Brick is an ed tech company that teaches people how to get into passion fields, one being called the Sneaker School. So we're eventually going to be feeding the Dwayne talent.
Right.
Why I really love what Dwayne did is no one wanted to listen to him while he was in the building.
Right.
So which was to the point before, he just created it on his own.
Right, disruption. Yes.
Disruption, which is going to just continue to happen more and more if you're not open to change and the people that you're working with.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too that I think our industry, no matter basically what industry, as we were hearing, earlier, that it may sound different, but there's just still the same issues that you're going to see in terms of human change, people's needs, and then how as employers, that we need to be able to support that.
Right.
And it would be interesting too if there's any insights that anybody in the audience wants to share, or any questions as well that they may have for us. But I think what's important too is insights, if there's been anything that somebody wants to share where they've had to battle change and maybe listening to an employee and doing something different, or how to go about and do that. We can open that up too. No. So if not, think about it.
Sure. I think there's one over there.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, thinking about bringing new employees in and running them through your own onboarding process and cultural orientation to the company. How important is that? And then secondly, can you comment on what you're seeing out of universities today? Are students coming in ready to take on these kind of changes, and are you having to sort of re-educate them?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, to answer the university question, they're definitely coming in with their own perspective on what education is looking like. I feel like in our model, the bricks and mortar of education is not relevant to them anymore. They want something that's more flexible, that they can check in when they want, but they also want, to Dwayne's credit, they want something that's half academic, half industry. The way that they look at education is like, wow, okay, this is cool. If I come here for 4 years and get a piece of paper, is it guaranteeing me a job, right? So more companies are shifting towards like, okay, if I can educate you internally at Nike on how Nike does things and make that become the education, more students or people who are interested in the industry are levitating to that and wanting to run towards that because they see it as like either a way, A, to be entrepreneurial, or to become an employee at a dream place that they wanted to work.
Right. And you had also mentioned too that you were saying how, and from a hiring standpoint as well, is that not looking at maybe just the person that graduated from Harvard, but they may have had some other...
Yeah, they've started to change their hiring processes and how they're looking at people to hire. The days of like, I went to Harvard, I should be at the top of the pack. They're looking at the soft skills where it's like, did you go to night school to get here? Because now you can prove to me you have grit to make something happen. And now HR people are like, okay, let me look for the person who went to night school or had to fight through 3-4 different universities and then figured it out. Because that's someone who's ready to work hard versus the old model where it's just, let's get this fancy degree and then I get a job.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for training, I think that's extremely important.
Absolutely.
It may sound that that's very traditional, but in terms of your employees coming in and knowing basically the guidelines of the company, to get excited about it, to have an understanding, and then also to know where their path can be and in terms of growth so that they do have exposure to different aspects of the company. I think the training model, and obviously you can do that in many different innovative ways as well. It's not some big, thick 3-ring binder that it used to be, right? And then to also continually educate. You know, the beauty is being into a company that is very aware of the different technologies out there and that they are going to implement that into their company. And so, you know, working for some larger companies, when it was like, okay, we need beta testers for SAP, I was like, oh, I want to learn this. Yes, absolutely. We need beta testers for Salesforce. Of course, it's, you know, and then again, as we heard earlier, it's like people want to use that technology also at home, right? So I think the training is really, really important, and to give that continuous training, you know, as if you're onboarding them again, but to keep everybody's skills sharp, and then for them to be aware of the technologies that the company is implementing, even if it's not relevant maybe in their sector, but they're seeing that the company is adapting and changing to the times. Right, exactly, and this is what's needed. Does that answer your question? Any other insights or questions? Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, Duncan Jones from Forrester Research. You talked about strategic partners and vendors earlier on. You didn't really go into a lot of detail. It's something I've studied. In my experience, most clients, when they talk about strategic partners, they don't really know what that means, and actually they're really treating them like vendors. Can you talk a little bit about the difference and how you change a mindset from a procurement audience that's treating people as vendors and just calling them partners as a euphemism?
Right. Good question. For me, and again, and that was in the context of, having a high EQ, is understanding the goals of that partner and vendor, not just your own goals, right? And then that is also a part of collaboration. So even if their goals are not going to pertain specifically for your business, but how they're moving as a company, and I think that's continuously having a relationship with them. If they are looking to grow globally, that's not your goal right now, but these are different things that they're implementing, to constantly be aware of what your partners are doing, and then to keep them informed as well of what you're doing as a company. And then the other great thing that's important is to come to them and say, hey, we're working on this. What is your interest, or what is your knowledge or your expertise? So bringing them to the table, because sometimes we look at some of our vendors and only it's, okay, now it's time to use them for that. But there may be some things that you can discuss with them, and then to be able to collaborate with them on, and that helps create that true partnership. And then from there, when you put in the strategy part of, this is what we're looking towards the future as a company, what are you looking to do as a vendor, towards the future as well. And that could be something that you're bringing on together. So it's just not this, I'm going to sign off and thank you and I need you to build something or anything like that, but it is an actual true partnership and the strategy behind it. And that's long-term vision. It's not just reactionary, I need something made right now. And so I think it's important to make sure that in an organization that you have somebody that really specifically, works towards that because of a high level of emotional intelligence, and that they're able to be adaptable, even if it may not be their expertise, but to at least have a really full vision of some of your partners and how that's going to help benefit the company, and then how your company can also benefit them.
Are you saying find someone in your organization with a high level of EQ to be responsible for the partnerships?
I think
Differently from the people who deal with vendors?
no, it doesn't have to be. It depends on the organization and what they're capable of doing. If not, then it is about understanding EQ and training them as well, and looking at the partnership in a different format as opposed to just something reactionary, I need it here, but how do we actually cultivate a relationship, and what does that look like from long term? Because not everybody can do that. Right? But what are the tools and resources that you can have? And who is that person that can, really implement that? And that's being, aware and having relationships with your employees, with your management team, and knowing, oh, this will be a good person that we can help kind of build the relationship, and make it a bit better than maybe where it is currently. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions?
Or insights, or
Insights
if
or
there's,
questions?
what I'm also curious too, if there's been any ideas or changes that people have done too in their business, or that they've had to adapt as well.
Or what
to
are
share.
people seeing, right? Like, what are people seeing, to your question? Right? Like, what are people seeing more all the time, often, that you have to adapt to? Whether it's you're working for Nike or you're working for whoever it is.
Right.
Right? Like, what are
Yeah.
those common things that people are seeing?
I have a client that, in terms of disruption, is he's had to, and he comes from he is a former athlete, and so he has been able to kind of change things in how there's the viewpoint of an athlete, right, and how working within the business space. So how do athletes invest? How do athletes become a part of the tech world? How do they actually look at it from long-term strategy and want to make sure that they're protecting themselves while they're still playing, right? So in the end, their career ends at a very early age, and then what? What he explained to me is, when he came into the league, all his heroes were leaving, and they were leaving broke. So what did he decide to do? He decided to fire his agent and to learn on his own and take things in his own hand. And he has been extremely successful in doing that. And then for theirs, creating a platform to educate new athletes coming into the league, and then having events and summits for them to talk with investors, look at new tech companies, and then to also have those conversations of how they want to, build their own portfolio as well, but put them in that space and environment. And so that's different. There's a level of trust there because it's somebody who's been in that space, right? And then it's able to look at their future and to be able to change things that they normally wouldn't have done. It was just going through the league, trusting the league, and then moving on. But it's like, no, taking that ownership as well. So you have somebody that's disrupted in the athletic space, right?
He's changing the journey of being an athlete from start to finish.
Right, exactly.
Versus someone who just runs up and down the floor or a field and now becoming someone who has multifaceted.
Right, and we see a lot of athletes now that, are very vocal about it. Right, yes, that they have to be. And it's something that he did, he really kicked that off, and I think that's important. So we can see how people adapt and change within business, within their own industries that could be completely different from the industry that we're in,
Absolutely.
right? And then we're able to see how can that apply as well for, the industry that you may currently be sitting in as well. Yeah. Is there a question?
So I'm a management consultant. Often the partner or senior manager will sell the change to the C-suite, and I, as someone younger in my career, I'll be the one kind of implementing the change with the person that's going to, the change is going to most, I don't want to say violently, but violently change their kind of day-to-day functions. Mm-hmm. What's a good way to sell the change to someone or frame that conversation of how the change is going to kind of affect them?
I think, I'll take this one. I think for that is, and it kind of sounds like you're also maybe a younger person in the room as well. Yes. And so sometimes the perception can be, what do you know, you're young. You don't have the experience like I do. And so, for you, I think what's important is to understand where they've been coming from, listening to them, understanding what has been some of their problems, if they're going to speak to that. And then has to be an exchange of conversation of not you just coming in and this is what it is, but for them to feel heard and valued as well. And then it is taking that time and building that relationship. So understanding where they've come from. People do want to be heard, as we heard this earlier on the stage. And so I think that's a way of creating that relationship with them, and then make it collaborative. In the end, it has to be collaborative, not just you coming in and telling them what it is. And I know that's time. You have an efficiency process there as well. I understand that. But it's the only way that's going to make it a bit easier for somebody to be heard and make it like that this is teamwork, that you are collaborating with them.
I mean, just to piggyback on another thing that I like to do is position yourself as outside of the building. Like you don't work there and this is what you're seeing, and have the conversation that way. Usually when you can detach yourself from the actual situation, it's easier for people to hear what you're saying, especially with a fresh new idea. Because typically, just as humans, we're attached to like, I'm here, you're here. And when you make yourself the third party, people hear you completely different. So it's not Dion speaking to Carren, it's Bob outside and this is what I seen. Bob's doing this crazy, crazy stuff. We should pay attention. And then you start in dialogue.
Right.
And then through dialogue, you can kind of finesse your point that way.
Right. Yeah. And if they're still not open to it, it's going back to them.
Right.
And then asking them, what have they been through? What are their challenges? Because, sometimes they'll look at it and say, it's the third party. I don't want to hear anything about it. You don't know. You haven't been here. Then you have to go back and then talk to them. So again, it's collaboration in the end.
Cool.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you guys so much.